the presidential elections, and yesterday we talked about the nomination process, how you had to go about winning primary elections, gaining pledge delegates, and state by state. And we showed you a map. This was for 2020 in the United States for the Democrats, and you see that primary season is spread out from January to June, and every state's worth a different amount of delegates, or they're going to send a certain number of delegates to the National Convention, and it's at the National Party Convention where the delegates will officially choose the presidential nominee for their party. Right? Now, once they choose the nominee for their party, remember there are other things that transpire or take place at the National Party Convention. One of which is issuing the party platform, setting forth the issues, the stances that the party has on major issues. And remember, the platforms you try to write in a vague capacity, because if you're too specific and you talk yourself into a promise or a guarantee of any kind, then you have to follow through on that, because anything that you don't achieve is seen as a failure. And so if you look at the party platforms, they can be fairly vague, and they're not as meaningful as they once were. Now remember, national party conventions will have the party's platform. They will have the official nomination of the candidate. You'll also have the official nomination of the vice president. The president chooses his own or her own running mate, and that person will be the VP candidate. Now, in a running mate choice, okay, when you are selecting a running mate, what type of person do you pick to be your running mate, to be your vice president? And sometimes people's natural inclination is to want to believe you want to pick somebody who thinks like you do, somebody who's like you, and that's not the way you want to go. When you pick a running mate, you want to pick somebody who balances you out, who adds appeal and is strong where you're not. That's somebody who can help you win over votes, and also is somebody that can give you strengths and your weakness. Like, here's an example. When President Obama picked Joe Biden to be his running mate, it was seen as a good balance because Obama was relatively young at the time. He was 47, which I know you guys think is old, but in presidential terms, that's a baby. Okay? And Obama's 47, and he's relatively new to national politics. He hadn't even finished one full Senate term. So he picks Joe Biden, who's older, more experienced, and has foreign policy experience. Right? That adds balance to the ticket. Now, here's a better example. Go back to John Kennedy in 1960 when he picks a running mate. He surprises people by picking Lyndon Johnson. And the difference between the two candidates is pretty deep. You have John Kennedy, who is a New Englander. He comes from a really wealthy family, all the finest education, has the looks, has the polish. He's very well spoken, articulate. He's naturally charismatic and likable. Whereas Lyndon Johnson, on the other hand, is a southerner from Texas, dirt poor, went to some no-name small college, had to work for everything that he ever had in his whole life, was as vulgar as it gets. Maybe only Richard Nixon could match him for vulgarity in terms of language. Right? And he's the running mate for the super, really wealthy New Englander elitist who had all the best education. Well, JFK says this is a guy who understands how to get things done. Lyndon Johnson was a senator who had a massive amount of experience at getting legislation passed. He knew how to work things through Congress. And he was also kind of belligerent at times. Lyndon Johnson, if he couldn't win you over with his charisma, he would simply just badger you to death until you gave him what he wanted. Okay? And he's a southerner with a New Englander. That adds balance. Okay? Winning over the South was important to Kennedy. Kennedy's a Catholic. Lyndon Johnson's not. Right? These things matter when you're picking a running mate. And Donald Trump, when he picked Mike Pence, there's a good article that came out last year that was discussing why Mike Pence took on the job as vice president. And originally, Mike Pence told the Trump team that you should consider somebody else for a running mate because I will tell you exactly how I feel about certain issues, and I won't just let you run over me. And the Trump team said, that's what we want. We respect somebody who can give us an honest opinion, right? But remember, if you're a running mate, You have to go along with what the president wants if you're the VP, and we'll talk about that later. But more specifically, there's a danger to picking a running mate, right? When you choose somebody to be your vice presidential candidates, or excuse me, your vice presidential candidate, you have to find somebody who's going to play their role. Let me ask you something here. If you females will know this better than males, but when you go to a wedding, the bridesmaids' dresses are almost always intentionally unattractive. Why is that? Because nobody upstages the bride on her wedding day. She needs to be the one who's the most attractive, the one where all the attention is focused upon. Right? Same is true here. You don't want to pick a running mate who, shall we say, is a little bit prettier than you. You don't want a running mate who's going to upstage you or draw attention away from you. Right? You need to pick somebody who, you want them to be competent and you want them to be capable, but they can't draw the attention away from you. And here's an example of how that happens. In 2008, John McCain is running for president, and early on, when we found out he was going to get the nomination for the Republican Party, and that Barack Obama was going to get the nomination for the Democratic Party, the real choice of candidates here, a lot of people thought McCain was older, stuffier. Even though he's a Republican, he wasn't really popular with the religious crowd in the Republican Party. And to kind of augment this, he picked Sarah Palin to be his running mate. And Sarah Palin was younger. She was kind of a no-name from Alaska. The fact that he picked a female helped out the Republican Party, they thought. But Sarah Palin, she was somebody who wanted attention for herself. She's somebody who, once it became fairly clear that John McCain was not going to win the presidential election, all the polls were indicating a strong Obama victory, Sarah Palin started doing more to draw attention to herself, and she cared less about helping John McCain win the presidential election. So that's the danger that there is in picking a running mate. Now, what if you want to run as an independent for president? You don't want to go through the process of going through the nominations, going through the primary season, having to spend all that time and money in these places. Could you just run as an independent? And the answer to that question is yes. But there is an obstacle. There's a trade-off. If you're an independent or a third party and you want to run in the presidential election, you can skip all the primary and the nomination process. But here's where it gets difficult. To get your name on the ballot, you as a candidate have to comply with every single state's requests to get on the ballot. Every state has a procedure to get your name on the ballot if you want to be considered as a presidential candidate. In some states, it's really simple. Like in Louisiana, all you have to do is pay a fee, and I think it's something like $1,000, and they'll put your name on the ballot. Right? Other states, you have to collect signatures from citizens, and that's really difficult to do because people don't want to sign something, especially when they're not entirely sure what it is, and they might have a preferred candidate of the two major parties. Okay? So you have to, or your representatives or your people have to go from state to state and do whatever their state says is necessary for you to get on the ballot. Okay? Now, once you win your party's primary, the general election, there's some things that change a little bit. Okay, and one of the things is that we have to focus on one another, like the two candidates focus on one another. And one of the big parts of the general election, where you have a Democrat facing off against a Republican, a series of presidential debates. Traditionally, at least when I say traditionally, we're talking about for about the past 40 years now. Presidential debates, we have 3 presidential debates and 1 vice presidential debate. Right? And those debates give you a chance in prime time. Major networks will carry them, as we saw this year. The debates give you an opportunity to see and hear from the candidates themselves and see how they respond in kind of it's almost like a reality TV situation. Now, the debates, and if you go to debates.org, The Commission on Presidential Debates. The two parties set up the Commission on Presidential Debates, and they give you lots of information about debate history, the CPD itself, how you can watch, news, international media, etc. And so, you can look through this, and they'll tell you about the series of debates. And this was everything here in the news. And the debates, there's a lot of negotiation that takes place between the two parties. When they, you would think this would be really simple and straightforward, but the debates are a big deal because you think about this. Well, will the candidates get the questions ahead of time? All right. Can we bring notes? Can we not bring notes? Will they be seated at a table or a podium? Are they standing or are they sitting? Can they take notes during this? Are they allowed to have water? Will the questions come from the crowd, or will the questions be generated by a moderator? Who's going to be the moderator? Are we going to mute candidates if they talk over time? So there are things that the Commission on Presidential Debates has to work out with the two sides, and this stuff matters, and I'll give you an example why. We'll go back to 2008 again when Barack Obama and John McCain were the two candidates for the president. John McCain and Obama negotiated this out, but Obama's team made sure that at least one of the debates was one where the two candidates were standing at all times with no podium. And the reason for that is because that Barack Obama is very good at showing his youth, his ability to move around. He's very charismatic too, very likable figure. And John McCain is older, and most people didn't know this at the time, but John McCain was a prisoner of war in a Vietnamese camp for 5 years, and he was tortured. And because of that, he had limited mobility, especially in his arms. And so when he walked around, sometimes he looked a little robotic. And the Democrats wanted they wanted people to look at him and see this guy's an old man who doesn't move around that well, and we have a younger candidate who's a healthier individual, and this matters. Now, about the Commission on Presidential Debates, something else that's relevant here too, and like I said, you could scroll around and look at this on your own, but one of the things that's difficult, third parties and independent candidates don't get as much access to the debates as they'd like. For third parties to get access, they have to have something like 15% support in major opinion polls, and they have to be on the ballot in enough states to win. And for most third-party candidates, that disqualifies them. So typically, you only see the president and vice president. Now, let me ask you this here too. The presidential debates, what do you think people remember? Is it the policies that the presidents bring up, presidential candidates, bring up, or do they remember the funny, witty stuff? Just like everything else, they remember the one-liners and the zingers, right? I'll give you a couple examples, and then I'm going to show you a video that was a classic example. In 2012, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama are debating, and the moderator asks Mitt Romney, hey, Republicans have been criticized for not being as inclusive of women in their political, in politics and government. And do you have any women in mind that you would put in places or positions in government should you be elected? And Mitt Romney, excited to answer that question, specifically said, oh, we have binders full of women. And that's all people remember, that he had binders full of women. Think about this year, the one vice presidential debate. What do we remember? The fly on Mike Pence's head. We remember the stuff that doesn't really matter, the zingers, the one-liners, or the weird little things that happen, right? And I'm going to give you one more classic example here of how the image, the one-liners matter. In 1988, you had the one vice presidential debate, okay? And the Republican vice presidential candidate was Dan Quayle, and the Democrat was a guy named Lloyd Bentsen. Lloyd Bentsen was an older Democrat who'd been around for a long time. He'd been a senator. Dan Quayle was very young at the time. He was only 37, and he was a vice presidential candidate. Now, Dan Quayle, before this debate, had specifically been touting as his experience. People were kind of making fun of him because he was younger, and they said he wasn't really up to this. And he had kept saying that I have as much experience as Jack Kennedy, and he's talking about John Kennedy. People who knew him called him Jack, but he said, I have as much experience as John Kennedy did when he became president. So me being vice president is not a big deal, and if I ever had to become president, it wouldn't be a big deal because JFK did it, so could I. Well, Lloyd Bentsen had been paying careful attention to Dan Quayle comparing himself to JFK, and Lloyd Bentsen was a guy who used to work with JFK, so this came up during the debate, and here's how this transpires. Take a look at this video here.
I don't mean to beat this drum until it has no more sound left in it, but to follow up on Brett Hume's question, when you said that it was a hypothetical situation, it is, sir, after all, the reason that we're here tonight, because you are running not just for vice president. And if you cite the experience that you had in Congress, surely you must have some plan in mind about what you would do if it fell to you to become president of the United States, as it has to so many vice presidents just in the last 25 years or so.
Let me try to answer the question one more time. I think this is the fourth time that I've had this question. And I think that 3 times that I've had this question, and I'll try to answer it again for you as clearly as I can. Because the question you're asking is, what kind of qualifications does Dan Quayle have to be president? What kind of qualifications do I have, and what would I do in this kind of a situation? And what would I do in this situation? I would make sure that the people in the cabinet and the people and the advisors to the president are called in. I'll talk to them, and I'll work with them. And I will know them on a first-hand basis, because as vice president, I'll sit on the National Security Council. And I'll know them on a first-hand basis because I'm going to be coordinating the drug effort. I'll know them on a first-hand basis because Vice President George Bush is going to recreate the Space Council, and I'll be in charge of that. I will have day-to-day activities with all the people in government. And then, if that unfortunate situation happens, if that situation, which would be very tragic, happens, I will be prepared to carry out the responsibilities of the presidency of the United States of America. And I will be prepared to do that. I will be prepared not only because of my service in the Congress, but because of my ability to communicate, to lead. It is not just age, it's accomplishments, it's experience. I have far more experience than many others that sought the office of vice president of this country. I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. I will be prepared to deal with the people in the Bush administration if that unfortunate event would ever occur.
Senator Benson.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. In a situation like that.
Please.
In a situation like that.
You're only taking time
Is to call in the joint.
your own candidate.
That was really uncalled for, Senator.
You're the one that was making the comparisons, Senator. And I'm one who knew him well. And frankly, I think you're so far apart in the objectives you choose for your country that I did not think the comparison was well taken.
Tom, a question.
That is about as good as you're going to get when it comes to just roasting somebody in a presidential debate. And also, you notice too that back then the audiences, like, they cheered or booed if something came up. Now, real quick, one more thing to add about the campaigning in the general election. The debates are obviously important, and the media, how the media portrays the presidential election, is significant as well. What do they focus on? Okay, once again, is it the policies themselves? No, I wish it was. I wish they would play up that here's what presidential candidate so-and-so says we need to do about tax policy, and then give you some specifics. But no, instead, what do they focus on? The sound bites, the little clips, the zingers, the one-liners. Those are the things that they focus on. Or who's ahead in the polls. That's where the focus is in the media. It's about the stuff that doesn't matter, right? And that's really kind of depressing when you think about it. Now, tomorrow what we'll get into is the Electoral College and the purpose of that and how they go about choosing the president. So hope you guys are doing all right. Talking in soon.